Hello again to all subscribers and listeners of this channel. And today's video is going to be a continuation of the series, Why Evolution is Bullshit, Part 3, Human Evolution. This is going to be numbers 10 through 12. Again, I repeat, evolution is the hypothesis, masquerading as a theory that people believe is a fact. We're now moving on to numbers 10 through 12 of part 3 of the series. Here I will discuss or break down where did our chromosomes come from, exactly how did we human beings develop our very specific but unusual body parts that we need for survival, and I'll break down how Darwin's evolutionary theory was usurped by others, his cousin mostly, in order to push an idea of social Darwinism and eugenics, which led to unsavory ideas in society that throughout the last century most people would be against, but that's how it went down over the last century in the Western civilization. So that's the intro. Without anything further, let's begin. Number 10. Where did our chromosomes come from? Our chromosomes, or our chromosome count, doesn't seem to match the apes, despite the fact that they're supposed to be genetically our closest relatives. But before I go ahead, let's start with the basics. Let's start with the fundamental stuff first. So, 10A. What is a chromosome? According to Wikipedia's article, a chromosome is a DNA molecule with part or all of the genetic material, genome, of an organism. Dictionary.com or .cambridge.org says a chromosome is any of the structures shaped like rods that are found in living cells and contain the genes, chemical patterns, which control what an animal or plant is like. And then we go into Merriam-Webster's definition. Says that a chromosome is any rod-shaped or thread-like DNA containing structures of cellular organisms that are located in the nucleus of eukaryotes. They're usually ring-shaped in prokaryotes, such as bacteria. And these structures contain all or most of all the genes of the organism. So ultimately, based off of these three definitions, we can accept that a chromosome is a molecular structure of thread-like material in some type of rod shape that contains the DNA of a living organism. And DNA is basically the deoxyribonucleic acid. That's the actual name where we get the DNA acronym from. Is these acid molecules that define what an organism is, how it behaves in an environment, and what the organism does until it dies. 10B. What do chromosomes do? Chromosomes do quite a few very important things in an organism's body. They store the organism's DNA in a tight little package within each cell of the body. This allows the body to store its genetic information, allows the cells to divide efficiently, and allows the body easy access to the information for the organism to do whatever it is that the organism needs to do while it's alive. If the DNA was not wrapped into a chromosome, we would all have a horrible cell division when it comes to our cells growing and dividing, and the DNA strands, roughly 6 feet long, would have nowhere to fit in the body if it wasn't conformed to this chromosome shape. Chromosomes also play a major role in reproduction. Chromosomes are the main structures that join together when a sperm and an egg meet in conception. Without chromosomal structure, the DNA of the father and the mother would probably never fuse together, and the baby would never grow within the womb. 10C. Why are chromosomes playing a major role in reproduction? They seem to be the major part of the DNA of the parents merging together to become the DNA of the child. In such a short time, they are already figuring out somehow what the child's genotype should be, what their blood type is, their phenotype, how tall they'll be, their bone structure, etc. Again, if it weren't for the individual chromosomes and how they fuse together in the uterus, none of us will be able to grow in our mother's uterus in the first place. 10D. The differences between chimpanzee chromosomes and human chromosomes. One of the major differences between chimpanzee and Homo sapiens sapien is the number of chromosomes we have. Human beings have 46 chromosomes in total, or 23 pairs of chromosomes, whereas chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes, or 24 pairs of chromosomes. Now, mind you, humans and chimps are supposed to be the most genetically identical species, or at least they're supposed to be the species most genetically identical to us as far as mammals go. Yet our chromosomes, which contain a lot of DNA, are very different from each other. A very different count, very different structure. 10E. Why is that? Why do chimps have 2 or more chromosomes than us? Well, no, 2 more chromosomes than us. If we all come from a common ape ancestor, why did the chimpanzee get 48 total chromosomes while human beings have 46? In fact, where did the chromosomes come from in the first place? How did they first form in the early organisms? Who or what decided to handle our DNA together or bundle our DNA together in these chromosomes in chimps and within human beings, in these little clumps of material? How did that come about? We don't know. And as far as I can see, no amount of fossil evidence, hypothesis, experimentation, etc. has been able to show us where these tiny but very important structures come from, nor have we been shown how they change over time. We don't know if the chromosomes, can change over time at all. So until we get actual observations of chromosomal change, growth, evolution, etc., we don't know what chromosomes are or how they're going to be like in the future. We can only speculate. And again, science can have speculation, but we can't not focus on just speculation. We need evidence, we need observation, we need measurements. Speculation is not the same thing and never will be the same thing as observable facts. Number 11. Where do these other unusual body parts come from that human beings need for our survival? Our eyes, our specific type of hair, our sweat glands, our oil glands, our thyroid gland, our nose. Where did these come from? How did they develop? As stated before, human beings seem to be a mismatch or a mismatch of different characteristics of both terrestrial and marine mammals. We have so many body parts and so many different mechanisms for our survival that aren't really very prominent in other species of organism, especially the terrestrial mammals like they are in us. For example, 11A. Where did our specific eye structure come from? Human beings have a lot of white in our eyes. It's called the sclera. As bizarre as it seems, most animals do not have a sclera or whites of their eyes. And if they do, it's very minimal compared to what human beings have. So why do Homo sapiens develop a sclera, an extreme white of our eyes at all? What is the purpose of it? Especially when one considers that most animals have considerably better and or very different eyesight compared to humans. 11B. Why do we have the hair patterns that we have in our body? Our pubic hair and our head hair. Especially the curly hair of African people. Where did that even come from? And human beings don't have a lot of body hair. Even the hairiest people, who are generally tend to be of European or Arab descent, don't have fur covering their body like other organisms do. The only humans that have hair covering their entire body tend to be the ones that have a condition called hypertrichosis. Otherwise, human beings are relatively naked compared to other organisms. We have thick hair on our head. We have men's facial hair, our armpits, and around the genitalia. Whereas many mammals either have very thin hairs or are covered in hair except for certain parts of the body in certain species, and depends on the species. Then there's the hair of African people, like I said, and people who live in tropical areas. We have a curl pattern in our hair in human beings that is very rare in other organisms. There's only like 2 organisms I can think of that have extremely curly hair similar to what humans have. So it's very rare and it's very unique for us to have that. The people who have it in tropical climates like in Africa and in the Caribbean, in parts of South America, in the South Pacific, etc. Very rare, very unique. 11C. How do we develop sweat glands? No one seems to know where we human beings got our sweat glands from. They're very efficient in terms of helping us cool off, but there's nothing showing in any record how that developed or what developed into the sweat gland over time. And again, the fossil record, like I said, doesn't show this progression at all and never will be. Sweat glands are not something that can preserve. So we have no evidence as to where they came from or how they developed. 11D. Where do we get our oil glands from? We have the ability to secrete oil that coats our skin and protects our skin to a certain extent. Same problem with the sweat glands. There's no explanation as to where oil glands came from or how they developed within our species physiology. 11E. Where do we get our thyroid gland from? The thyroid gland helps to regulate our intake and use of protein and helps to regulate our metabolism. This is an example of a bodily structure that seems way too complex to have sprang up out of nowhere or slowly evolved from a common ancestor. The thyroid, just like blood clotting, comes across as a body part that without it, we as human beings would die very easily. So how would an ancient ape ancestor have existed prior to developing a thyroid? I don't know. 11F. In fact, where do we get any glands from? Not sure. What is a gland? According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, a gland is a specialized cell, group of cells, or an organ of the endothelial origin that selectively removes materials from the blood concentration or alters them and or secretes them for further use in the body or for elimination from the body. So ultimately, glands are organs or cell bundles that change substances in the body, the thyroid gland. They secrete hormones from one body part to another body part in order to facilitate some type of growth or function. Example would be the pituitary gland. Or they secrete substances away from the body or out of the body through cell membranes to be expelled. Example of this would be the sweat glands. How does a gland evolve and where would such an apparatus come from? Again, I don't feel that we have a good enough explanation for that. Without sweat glands, we would overheat. Without pituitary gland, we would not go through puberty or reach adulthood. And without a thyroid gland, we wouldn't regulate protein synthesis or our metabolism. Yet evolution would say that we either didn't have those organs in the past or they're very different in the past from what they are now. And evolution would say all this without any physical evidence to prove so. Not buying it, not good enough. 11G. Where do we get our nose? The way our nose is shaped, the way it's structured. So how and when did human beings develop the protruding nose that we have? The nose that sits outside the face and points directly forward, or mostly forward. Again, there's no explanation for where this came from. Also, I would like to add, too much of the evolutionary banter is along the lines of, and I quote, the organism needed it, therefore it developed generationally, unquote. And that's not explaining the mechanism that created that characteristic. Let me give you an example. If I ask you, how do you build a car? And you answer, well, I put the parts together because someone needed to drive it, unquote. Well, that's not explaining the step-by-step process or mechanism of creating the actual car or organism. The car needs upwards of 200 plus steps to make the car. You need to drill for oil. You need to separate the oil into gasoline and into plastic and into rubber. You need to get the metals. You need to dilute them down, concentrate them. You need to purify them, put them in molds, put them on an assembly line, etc. And what you have to understand is that an organism is far more complex than a car. Yet evolutionists fail to see that they're not actually explaining the multiple different steps needed not only for the creation of different characteristics, but evolutionists also fail to explain the step-by-step process that brought that organism into being in the first place. They're not explaining it step by step. They're explaining the reasons why something might exist. They're not explaining the process that brought that thing into existence in the first place. Again, when looking closely at our physiology as human beings, one does not start to think that whatever it is we have in our body was put like that from the very beginning due to some evolutionary process. Instead, they're going to start to think that it had to have been done by some other process that had us built a certain way from the very get-go. There couldn't have been a time where we existed without these particular body parts or characteristics that we have. If we needed these to survive, we always had them from the very beginning, as far as I can see. Number 12. Evolution, whether you want to admit to it or not, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was used to push things like eugenics, race superiority, social hierarchies, to a certain extent genocides, etc. But first, let's break down what I mean. What I mean is that different people took Darwin's ideas and used them to further things that by today's standards would be considered reprehensible. So let's start from the beginning. 12a. What was Charles Darwin's idea? Charles Darwin's idea was that different organisms developed different features to deal with different environments that they were living in. And many people attributed his study of this to the finches that he looked at in the Galapagos Islands, just off the west coast of South America. But he also studied farm animals and many other domesticated animals. And he recognized that certain animal breeds would have characteristics that would repeat in their offspring over and over again in subsequent generations. From his original studies came ideas such as natural selection, adaptation, survival of the fittest, etc. All these led to the theory of evolution as we know it today. 12b. Where did he get them from? Or where did he get these ideas from? As stated, Darwin got most of these ideas from studies of multiple generations of animals that were around him. Although there's a lot of info showing most of his ideas may actually have come from his study of domesticated animals before he traveled to South America on the Beagle. Either way, he studied generations of animals and found similar characteristics were passed down to the offspring over and over and over again every generation. From this, he developed the ideas that eventually became the evolutionary theory. 12c. Who else followed or believed in his ideas? Many people close to Darwin followed his ideas, but we'll focus on only 3. One was Thomas Huxley, who was nicknamed Darwin's Bulldog because he spoke in a lot of different lectures and debates defending the ideas that Darwin came up with. He was a big proponent of not just evolution, but also participated in many of those debates with other scientists, not only defending Darwin's idea about man evolving from apes, ape-like beings, but he also advanced it in many public lectures. Herbert Spencer was the next person who was influenced by Darwin, as he was the one that coined the term or the phrase, quote, survival of the fittest, unquote. And last but certainly not least was Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton. He not only favored Charles Darwin's work, but he further advanced it to explain the phenomena seen in human beings. And unfortunately, it was Galton's work that eventually became the framework for ideas and movements like the Eugenics movement. So let's go further. 12d. What did they do with their interpretation of Darwin's ideas? Thomas Huxley simply advanced and argued in favor of Darwin's ideas in print and in public lectures. Herbert Spencer advanced a less aggressive version of Darwin's ideas in his own writings about human affairs. But the most insidious and most intense of them was Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, who was the most aggressive about pushing Darwin's ideas, not only into examining social behavior, but also to use these ideas to alter humanity in a way that he thought would be beneficial to humanity. 12E. What did Galton's ideas ultimately lead to? It led to the eugenics movement, ultimately. And what I mean by the eugenics movement, the eugenics movement ultimately led to things like sterilization, encampments, genocidal policies, like what was done to Native Americans, different types of camps that housed different types of people that were seen as inferior, etc. It led to things like castrations of black men, sterilizations of some black women. This went on in the South a lot, if I remember reading correctly. It can even be tied to a lot of what the Nazi regime was doing to the Jews, Gypsies, the infirm, and other people that were considered undesirable during the rise of the National Socialist Party in Germany during the late 1920s and all the way to the end of World War II. The eugenics idea, unfortunately, can be linked to a lot of mayhem that occurred during and throughout much of the 20th century. 12F. What effect did this have on humanity at the time and since then? It had the effect of wiping out a few million people, sterilizing others, disrespecting human rights, disrespecting human beings' ability to have and raise their own children, and these policies literally played a role in making sure large numbers of people in the world never even existed. Now, mind you, in no way was this Charles Darwin's fault. Charles Darwin did not do any of this, no. We can't blame him or his ideas for people like Galton, his cousin, who decided to reinterpret them and use them to push these public policies. We can't even blame Galton for his views. He could have had these views, and public policy makers could have ignored them and not implement these policies on millions of people or millions of human beings at the time. But we do have to acknowledge that many public policies, like reservations, sterilization campaigns, work camps, etc., that we find abhorrent and inhumane, can be and are tied to misinterpretations of the evolutionary theory. We have to accept that. 12G. What does this mean for evolutionists? It means that you are following an idea that not only has not been proven to be a real phenomenon, but has also been used to justify things that you evolutionists, who tend to be more left-leaning, would find absolutely horrific. And that is something they really must sit down and think about when we look at the idea of evolution and how it affects our view of reality, etc. I'm going to stop there in this part of the series. That's all for now. Please like, subscribe, share, and donate to support this channel. You guys have a nice day. I'm out. Peace.